Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are. And oh, what a fabulous story this is. It's a fantastic story and I'm enjoying it and I hope you are too. And we're on part 4 of our story and it's getting very exciting. So before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's continue with part 4 of our story. Fiona Augustus, 8 years after Mrs. von Morrison's death. I was reading the handwritten letter that had arrived in the post that morning, with its American postmark, over and over again. Frankly, I was unable to believe what I was reading. Could this even be true? The letter appeared to be from Barry von Morrison. I knew I'd never forget the von Morrison family, and the unfortunate day I had guided his wife Sylvia von Morrison up a steep, treacherous cliff with a sheer drop. Sylvia von Morrison had tried to throw me off the cliff to my death. In this letter, Barry von Morrison revealed to me that he and his late wife Sylvia von Morrison were in fact the adopted parents of my birth child. I could not believe this was possible. It would seem the sweet little girl Haley, whom I also escorted around the Emerald Isle, was in fact my birth child. How could this be? Suddenly it would seem the enigmatic pieces of a perplexing puzzle that had bothered me for a long time began to fit together rather nicely. I realized that Sylvia von Morrison had attempted to kill me because I was my birth child's adopted mother. Maybe Sylvia von Morrison was in fact the mysterious woman with the French accent who had visited my husband Fabian and killed him with a cyanide pill deviously tucked away in a piece of sweet fudge. I was certain that this may indeed be the case, and the thought that this could be true hit me very hard. I'd been an absolute fool ever to put up my little girl for adoption. I didn't believe that Barry von Morrison was part of this insidious scheme conducted by his wife. I had met the man, and had found him to be genuinely nice, but there had been something so cold and unendearing about Sylvia von Morrison from the moment I had met her. Indeed, she had made my skin crawl. I read the letter several times over, just to make sure it was real. It read, "Dear Fiona, I'm sure you must remember me and my family. I think it would be hard to forget us, from 8 years ago, when you so graciously escorted me and my late wife Sylvia and my daughter Haley around Ireland. You did a phenomenal job in showing us some of the most unusual spots we would have never ever seen in a routine trip, and for that I'm grateful. The trip regretfully ended tragically, when my wife Sylvia lost her footing on the cliff face and fell tragically to her death. I have struggled with my guilt, wrestled with it a great deal, over the years, in regards to the tragic passing of my late wife Sylvia. It was an avoidable death. Of course it was. But Sylvia fully underestimated her physical ability to tackle those treacherous cliffs. If I had persuaded her not to attempt such a precarious challenge, she would never have listened. Sylvia was mulishly stubborn at the best of times, and she always got her own way. I'd never have been able to talk her out of this decision, so that in itself brings me a small measure of peace. I have thought of you a great deal over the years, and hope that as a tour guide you did not blame yourself for what happened to Sylvia that day, as none of this was your fault. I sincerely hope you know that. At the end of the day, it was a tragic accident. I do recall you did your level best to persuade my wife not to attempt the arduous trek up the cliff in the first place. You knew the cliffs well from your childhood, but even your sound advice failed to persuade my wife to change her mind. My daughter Haley has recently expressed a very keen interest in finding the whereabouts of her birth mother. I began to do my research. Imagine my surprise when I realized that I knew my daughter's birth mother. To my astonishment, I realized my daughter's birth mother was the guide that showed us around the Emerald Isle. What were the chances of that? You probably have no idea that Haley, the little girl you took around Ireland, was your daughter. But needless to say, Even though she was only 10 years old at the time, she remembers you very well, with fond memories, and was surprised and delighted to find out that you were in fact her biological mother, for she liked you very much. I think my late wife Sylvia must have known exactly who you were. I simply do not believe in coincidences like this, and I'm sure you don't either. Maybe she wanted Hayley to meet her birth mother. My late wife sometimes had strange ideas about things. I would like to invite you to come and stay with us here in America. Hayley would love to get to know you better. We currently live in the Georgian countryside, on a sizable plot of land, with spectacular scenery. It was a dream of mine to live in a rural setting like this. But my late wife Sylvia was a Boston girl through and through. She would have hated living in Georgia, but after her death there was no reason for us to remain in Boston. I have since married again, a lovely woman called Lara, who has been a fabulous stepmother to Hayley. Lara believes it would be wonderful for Hayley to get to know her biological mother. She would be delighted to welcome you to our home. I understand you have never remarried after your husband Fabian's tragic death. I admire your courage in that regard, not to get remarried. I am afraid I was not so brave. I've never been particularly good on my own. After Sylvia died, I became insufferably lonely. And 4 years after her death, I met Lara, and within 3 weeks of meeting her, we got married. I believe I've found my soulmate. If you say yes to my invite, I will cover all your expenses and organize your flight to America. You only have to say the word and you will make me and my family incredibly happy. I am hoping that this letter has not shocked you too much, for I am in shock to realize that I actually know the birth mother of my little girl. What a strange world this is. Yours very sincerely, Barry von Morrison. I stared at the letter incredulously, tears spilling unabashedly down my cheeks. My little girl was the von Morrison child, and I had met her all those years ago. I had warmed to her at once, marvelling that she had not become spoilt and self-entitled, swaddled by so much wealth. Hayley's mother had tried to throw me off the cliff, and now the dots were beginning to connect, and I didn't like what I was seeing. Had Hayley's mother, Sylvia von Morrison, tried to kill me so that my daughter Hayley could never reconnect with me later on in life? I'd always thought that Sylvia von Morrison had been jealous of me, and it turns out I wasn't wrong about that. She absolutely abhorred the fact that I was her daughter's biological mother. I couldn't help but wonder if she had had anything to do with Fabian's fortuitous passing. The mysterious woman who had visited Fabian's offices that day, the day that he died, was described as having blue eyes. I knew that Sylvia von Morrison had had brown eyes, but she could easily have been wearing contact lenses to make her brown eyes appear blue. The more I thought about this, the more certain I was that Sylvia had wanted to take me and Fabian out, and the thought made my bowels want to curdle. But Sylvia was dead now. I needed to focus on the future and forget about her. The future couldn't have looked more promising as far as I was concerned. My 18-year-old daughter wanted to get to know me. This was my biggest dream being realized. My mother would also be ecstatic to hear my news. It would mean she might finally get to meet her granddaughter. How I wished with all my heart that Fabian could be here to meet his daughter Hayley. He'd have been so excited about reconnecting with his girl after all these years. That was if he was still alive. There was not a day that didn't go by that I didn't miss him dreadfully, and the hurt was so painfully bad. I'd never been able to remarry again, although I had enjoyed a few fleeting relationships with men, but they had not amounted to much, as no one, in my opinion, could measure up to Fabian. My trip to Georgia, Atlanta, went by better than I could have ever envisaged. It far exceeded my wildest hopes and expectations. I had never been to America before. I was welcomed warmly by the von Morrison family. To my surprise, Lara von Morrison was extremely different to her predecessor. She was nothing like Sylvia von Morrison. Everything about her was extremely natural. She didn't even bother to dye her grey hair a dark colour. nor did she wear a stitch of makeup. Yet she was attractive with bright sparkling blue eyes and a gentleness to her nature that made her immediately likable and extremely endearing. You knew with her that what you were seeing is what you got. She was like an open book, unlike Sylvia von Morrison, who seemed to keep her emotions under a tight lock and key. I doubted that even Sylvia's husband Barry had known what she was really about. Lara was a well-upholstered woman who wore casual, very comfortable clothes, far from designer, jeans and T-shirts, that kind of thing. I wondered if Barry von Morrison had gone out of his way to marry a woman that was the antithesis of his late wife Sylvia. Perhaps his relationship with Sylvia had not been a bed of roses after all. As for my daughter Haley, our reunion was a very emotional one. Tears of happiness were shed between us, and even Lara, who was Haley's stepmother, also cried a great deal, saying over and over again how wonderful it was to finally meet me, and that I must never forget that I was part of their family. What Haley said to me on meeting me touched me to the quick. When my father told me that our tour guide, who took us around the Emerald Isle, had been my mother all along, I could hardly believe it. I was in shock. Her eyes shone so brightly when she told me this. I knew she meant every word of it. I was so happy. If anyone I'd met in my entire life could have been my mother, I'd have wanted it to be you. For some reason, even when we returned home from our Irish trip, I'd think about that very nice lady, the tour guide that we had, that took us around Ireland. When I realized you were my birth mother, I told my dad that you had to come and stay with us at once. You weren't just a tour guide. You were a friend. You weren't even a stranger to us. I wasn't even nervous about meeting you, because I knew you already, which was so very cool. Even though the von Morrisons were exceedingly wealthy, it was not something they flaunted. It was clear to see that Haley was a polished young lady these days. She was not remotely pretentious or self-entitled like her mother had been. Indeed, she preferred the natural world and its prepossessing beauty over anything material, and that was plainly obvious. I learnt she volunteered at a local animal shelter to help home abandoned cats and dogs, so she had a big heart on her, and was a great deal like her late father Fabian, who had also adored animals. The von Morrison family lived in a spectacular whitewashed Georgian house in the idyllic countryside, surrounded by sprawling groves of tall, lofty trees. When I looked at Haley, a lump appeared in my throat. I knew a part of Fabian had never ever died, and was living in Haley. Indeed, she was the splitting image of her late father. 2 weeks seemed to sail by so quickly, but that is what invariably happens when you're having a great time. And I was having a fabulous time, getting reacquainted with my daughter. Time went by so fast that the von Morrison family encouraged me to stay with them for longer. They didn't want me to return to Ireland too quickly, and consequently begged me to prolong my visit, which I did with very little encouragement. Finding my daughter again meant I just so enjoyed being around her, and we had a whole lot of making up to do. Haley has been very happy, Barry informed me, having you around. You've actually made her blossom, Fiona. I was very worried after Sylvia died. But she's been able to bounce back from all that tragedy. Luckily, Lara has been great, but nothing beats a biological parent, so I'm very glad you've come into our lives. I grew very fond of the entire von Morrison family. One morning when I came downstairs to the kitchen on a Saturday, I was surprised to find the house was extremely quiet. Not even the von Morrisons' dogs were around, but I gathered that a friend had taken them on a long walk somewhere. Lara was preparing blueberry pancakes for breakfast, which had become a firm favourite of mine since I'd come to America. "Where is everyone this morning?" I asked, looking around the kitchen curiously. "It seems so quiet in the house. You can hear a pin drop." "The house is quiet because the dogs have been taken on a long walk. I've kicked Haley and Barry out. I wanted us to have some alone time together." "Oh, any reason?" I asked. "Well, I told Barry and Haley that I was going to tell you how I loved having you around, how we would like to persuade you to move in with us. and come and live here permanently in America. Barry thinks it would be easy for you to get a green card, as your daughter is an American citizen. Hayley really wants you to move here. You can see she loves the bones of you. And now she's found you, she just does not want to let you go. I think she'll be absolutely devastated if you were to go back to Ireland. The two of you have just clicked. You have an amazing bond and a great friendship. And I've not seen Hayley this happy in a long time. And if that's not enough to persuade you to stay indefinitely, I love you, Barry loves you, and so do the dogs. I feel exactly the same way, I said. The truth is, while I'd like to persuade you to move to America, if we can get you a green card, that is not my ultimate purpose for getting this private time with you on your own. It's not, I asked, looking at Lara in surprise, while her kind blue eyes fixed on me. Goodness gracious, those pancakes smell jolly good, I said, glancing hungrily at the fluffy pancake that Lara had placed onto a plate with a spatula, and she handed it to me, draped with a plethora of Canadian maple syrup and a big scoop of vanilla ice cream. I had only ever had ice cream for breakfast since I had come to America, and what's there not to like about that? Well, I hoped you would say that. I made the pancakes especially for you. Now, please tuck in. I can see you're hungry. I sure am. Lara sat down next to me on the kitchen island, nursing a cup of warm coffee in her hands. She was tapping her fingers on the coffee cup, and looked as if something was weighing heavily on her mind. I couldn't fathom what it was, but I was sure it was important. I noticed there was a leather-bound book at her side, which immediately drew my attention. What is that? I asked curiously. Is that your diary? It's not my diary, said Lara. It's Sylvia's diary. It's Sylvia's diary, I asked, looking floored, wondering what Lara would be doing with Barry von Morrison's late wife's diary. Lara raised a hand. I know exactly what you're thinking, that no one should read someone's personal diary, even if they're dead. It's an invasion of privacy, is it not? I suppose it is, I agreed. Lara paused for a brief moment. There was something that niggled me when I learnt that the tour guide that Sylvia arranged to take the family around Ireland was in fact no other than Hayley's birth mother. That bothered me a whole lot. I just don't believe in coincidences. Do you? No, I can't say I do. I think that Sylvia knew very well who I was. Of course she did. I knew the only way I could get answers to my questions was by reading her diary, which is what I ultimately did. I'm not proud of myself for doing this, but I felt it needed to be done. The diary has made for some interesting reading, let me tell you. You could say I found some very unsettling answers to many of my questions. I think from this diary I learnt a great deal about my husband's late wife. You did? I'm afraid so. It's not all good. I so wish it was. I don't believe in speaking ill of the dead, but I do think that Sylvia had a narcissistic personality. Well, I can't say that would surprise me, I admitted. When I met her, I found her to be very cold-hearted and aloof. What did you find in her diary? I'm guessing you want to tell me, or you wouldn't have organised for us to spend some time alone together this morning. You're right about that, Fiona. You're not just a pretty face. I did need to share my startling findings with you in this diary. Because I think it's important you should know the truth. Sylvia describes in this diary how she managed to go to Ireland 2 years before her own death, how she visited your husband at work under the guise of being a potential client. She gave him a piece of fudge laced with cyanide. She describes the great pleasure she received in watching your husband Fabian die. She wanted him out of the way as quickly as possible. She saw him as a considerable threat. She didn't want him to one day have a relationship with Hayley. I thought as much. I kind of put the dots together, but I couldn't prove anything, could I? You mean you knew, Fiona? You knew that Sylvia was responsible for your husband's death? Asked Lara, looking surprised. You actually knew it? Well, when I received your husband's letter, I knew it couldn't be a coincidence that we had met before and that Sylvia had arranged the trip to Ireland. I'm going to tell you something, Lara, that's not going to be easy for you to hear. I haven't told anyone this. "What is it you want to tell me?" asked Lara. "I was the one that pushed Sylvia off the cliff to her death, on the day that she lost her life." "You did?" asked Lara, her face paling. "Well, I decided it was best to make out it was an accident. For all concerned, that is. In my opinion, it was the kindest thing for me to do. Sylvia imposed no threat to me once she was dead. I didn't want Barry or Haley to suffer any more than they were already suffering from Sylvia's fortuitous passing. I didn't want them to know that she had tried to push me over the cliff and had been screaming out for me to die. We had a little scuffle together. I luckily gained the upper hand. She was the one that lost her footing and then fell over the cliff, so in a way it really was an accident. I was lucky, because the first time she pushed me, I managed to regain my footing. I'd been navigating those cliffs for years as a girl, so that gave me a distinct advantage. But definitely Sylvia did try to kill me. That I do know for sure. At the time I couldn't think why. I just thought the woman hated me for some reason." "Goodness gracious me! Well, I'm not surprised. The diary describes her intention to drown you in a boating accident, or to push you over a cliff, and it seems that she chose to do the latter, but failed to succeed in her endeavours." I nodded. "I never knew why, of course. It was a question that troubled me for so many years. Why would a perfect stranger want me dead like this? But now the answers are very clear, aren't they?" Lara nodded. "That woman was appalling. She wanted to make your death look like a tragic accident. And you know what? She'd have got away with it. Her type always do. That's a very scary thought. I just knew you needed to know the truth. But word of advice to you, if I may, Fiona. I wouldn't mention any of this to Barry or Haley if I were you. I think knowing what Sylvia was really like would hurt them desperately. I don't think Barry needs to know what his late wife was really like. Nor do I want Haley to realise what a monster she was. Sometimes I do think that ignorance can be bliss. It can be kind because it protects you from being hurt. I would hate to see what this would do to Haley's emotional state. She's still only very young, 18 years old. If she knew any of this about her mother, I'm not sure what it would actually do to her." "I completely agree with you 100%. Neither Haley or Barry need to know about this. I can imagine how devastated they must have been over Sylvia's death. They don't need to know about her insidious plans against me and my husband." Lara nodded approvingly. "I had a feeling you would say this," she said, handing me Sylvia's diary to read. "I think you should read it, dear. I know you probably don't want to, but I think it will help you understand Sylvia's way of thinking. It might make what she did easier for you to comprehend." It was after I had read Sylvia's diary. My stomach was lurching. I felt nauseously sick when I realised how much Sylvia von Morrison had hated me with a passion. And, of course, my husband. How cunningly she had deviously decided to take us out. She saw us as a threat to her family's long-term happiness. I think after losing so many babies to a miscarriage, followed by a surrogate pregnancy that went badly awry, she didn't want me and my husband to come crawling out of the woodwork like a couple of ravenous termites, years later, only to steal Haley away from her life. She wanted to ensure that never ever happened, and the only way to guarantee success in this regard was to exterminate us, almost as if we were a couple of cockroaches that needed to be dealt with. I knew Lara was absolutely right. She was a kind, generous woman, who was only looking out for her husband and stepdaughter. There was absolutely no point in dragging Sylvia's name through the mud. The family had suffered enough after she had tragically died. They had gone through an unenviable grieving process after her death, which I wouldn't wish on anyone. I didn't want Haley's memories of her adopted mother to be tarnished. Like any biological mother, I wanted the best for my daughter, and I wanted to protect her from any unnecessary hurt. I did blame myself, of course, for putting her up for adoption, for if I hadn't done so, none of this would have happened. I wish that I had listened to Fabian's sagacious advice. And I also wish I'd asked my mother for help. I was very happy that Haley completely understood why I'd actually put her up for adoption. She was a wise young lady. "I get it. You were at university at the time when you fell pregnant. You didn't have much money, so you couldn't look after a baby properly. without relying on others for help. It must have been overwhelming for you. I'm so glad, though, you didn't abort the pregnancy, or I wouldn't be here now, and that's a horrible thought." "Oh, you would be here," I insisted. "There is no possible way I would have ever terminated my pregnancy. Never. I'd have given birth to you no matter what." I think Haley had been extremely glad to hear that from me. It reassured her that she was meant to be here. It was later that morning, after reading the explosive revelations from Sylvia's diary that had left me shaking like a leaf, that I told Lara I needed some time to myself, that I would be taking the ATV for a ride in the woodgrove. I'd always been the kind of person to take some light exercise when dealing with a stressful situation, for it helped to ease my angst and always give me a sense of perspective. "I think that's a jolly good idea," Lara said to me. She looked at me sympathetically. "I know what I've shown you is a shock, but I really thought you deserved to know the truth. I hope I did the right thing showing you her diary." "Oh, you did. You absolutely did. Everything is so clear to me now." "I think going out into the grove on the ATV for a ride is such a good idea," she encouraged. "The fresh air will do you the world of good. Besides, it's such a lovely day." I was exceedingly grateful to Lara for taking me into her trust and showing me the secrets in Sylvia's diary, which we both agreed to burn up so that Haley and her father would never set eyes on it. I can promise you, not knowing what happened to someone you love is one of the hardest things to ever endure, for it offers you no closure. I think Lara fully appreciated this, which is why she chose to show me Sylvia's diary. We knew the two of us would share a secret together, that we would sit on all our lives, rather like a couple of birds warming their eggs. I don't believe Sylvia was ultimately all evil. She was a mother who was determined to extinguish what she perceived to be a threat to her child. I know, for example, eaglets will fight among each other, and will usually toss the weakling out of the nest to ensure their ultimate survival. I think that Sylvia was so terrified of losing Haley, she was fiercely determined to get any threat out of her way. During her life she had been subjected to one miscarriage after another, and in that bizarre kind of way, I could almost understand her warped reasoning, even though what she did was despicable and cannot be excused at all. I was glad to be riding on the back of the Von Morrison ATV. I had never ridden an ATV before I came to America, so it was a whole new experience for me. I enjoyed the exhilaration I felt riding through the trees. I had been on many ATV outdoor adventures with Haley since I'd come to America, and for me it had become a much-needed escapism. I was so glad to be alone with my thoughts, and to feel as free as a wild bird with wings outstretched, surfing the wind currents in the sky. I felt very lucky to be here, and happy to be accepted and loved by the Von Morrison family, but most of all to be reconnected with Haley again, who reminded me so much of Fabian. She had her father's twinkling green eyes and a dry sense of humour. It was such a beautiful sunny day. The weather was about as close to perfect as you can possibly get. The sky was a cup of powder blue. The sun unabashedly lit up the earth with a soft light that wasn't obtrusive or glaring. It was like a magical spring day, even though it happened to be the middle of summer. A soft breeze was blowing against my skin with gentle kisses. I drew a huge sigh of relief as I found myself cocooned in the bosom of this enchanting woodland oasis, with its matriarch energy that seemed to hold me lovingly in its arms, as if I was a baby that needed to be soothed, as if the trees themselves sensed my disquiet and were reaching out to calm my inflamed thoughts that were burning in my head at this point in time. I think the expansive size of the woodgrove, with its friendly congregation of tall lofty trees that stretched out their boughs towards the heavens, made me become poignantly aware of exactly how small and inconspicuous I really was in the grand scheme of things, and oddly enough I found that to be profoundly comforting. I guess it gave me a greater sense of perspective. It made me realize that my issues and hurts, that I had bottled up inside me over so many years, were not all that significant. I knew I was not alone in the world in my grief or in my loss. There were so many people just like myself, hurting. People in life have all suffered knocks and shocks in one way or another. But all the trees in the grove have done so too. They've stood up during the storms that have hit them. They've overcome their own adversities, and I needed to do the same by example. Everything in the woodgrove whispered to my heart, like a lullaby of encouragement, so that I felt reasonably soothed as I rode down the woodland paths on the ATV and filled my lungs with the glorious fresh air. Lara had been right. This was doing me the world of good. I watched the leaves on the trees shaking against the soft nudge of the wind current, which made the trees look as if they were dancing, and that made me smile. I could smell a cocktail of woodland fragrances on the wind that seemed particularly pronounced today, as if my senses had been sharpened. It was a combination of woody, earthy, grassy and floral notes that were very uplifting. My intrepid, adventurous journey through the trees was rather like entering another world within a world, like in the story of The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe, when Lucy climbs into the closet and enters a world called Narnia, where it is winter all the time and the sun never shines. In a strange way, I felt rather like that. There was something so magical about the Woodgrove today. It felt very different to the other times I'd been there, but I couldn't put a finger on what it was. All I could say was that everything felt extremely alive, as if I could even hear the thoughts of the trees, a feeling I have never experienced before or since. My ride on the ATV through the trees and the rises and dips down the paths of the undulating forest floor got more precarious as I ascended a hilly incline with a very steep drop. I jolted uncomfortably on my seat. I could hear two people talking. The voices were female, and the chatter was like nothing I'd ever heard before. They were speaking excitedly in a strange language, as if they'd had great news. Kilati kalapota akila kinata, o botaki, o lokotolonapika, akilatana, o kolopoto, ankita, ankila, hasakalatwa, hipoko. In that moment, I really did feel like Lucy in The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe, when she entered the wardrobe and entered a magical world. Because it really was like I'd slipped into a parallel universe of some kind. It was as I got to the top of this hilly incline, I lost all focus on what I was doing, because ahead of me on the path were two gargantuan hair-covered humanoid figures that definitely were not bears. Were they abominable snowmen, I wondered? I had read about the abominable snowmen in children's books as a child. I realized these creatures, similar in description, were talking together in a human language that I'd never heard before. They seemed so caught up in their earnest conversation that I don't believe for a second they even noticed me. They seemed incredibly excited. What on earth were they, I wondered? They were so large, standing up on tree-trunk legs at over 9 foot tall, with powerful, sturdy backs, overlong arms, and very distinctive pyramid-shaped heads. When they walked together side by side, they almost looked as if they were floating on air, because they were so incredibly graceful. In that moment, my focus was completely misdirected, very disorientated, as I was staring at the back view of these very strange creatures. I was so caught off guard by this idiosyncratic encounter that my heart was galloping wildly in my chest, with a feeling of euphoria mingled with fear. It was almost as if I was on an emotional roller coaster and couldn't decide exactly how to react to what I was seeing. Should I be afraid, or should I embrace my curiosity? I was trying to stop the ATV, but instead it spun forwards, probably because I was pressing down on the accelerator instead of the brake. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but somehow I managed to lose control of the ATV. It rolled forwards, spinning down the hilly incline, embedded with jagged rocks and burgeoning roots. I was discharged from the ATV, as if it was spitting me out with disgust, rather like a horse throwing its rider off its back. The next thing I knew, I found myself lying under the ground, pinned under the ATV. How had this even happened? How had I managed to lose control of the vehicle? And more to the point, how was I going to get out from its heavy hold on my body? A dreadful pain began shooting up my legs, and I could feel tears gathering in my eyes, like the condensation on your bathroom mirror after a steamy bath. What on earth was I going to do? How was I going to get out from under the ATV? When would Lara come looking for me? In that moment I had forgotten about the big creatures that had caused my distraction. I was so caught up in the grip of my pain and wondering if I'd broken anything. The voices I'd previously heard that had grabbed my attention had become mute. Everything had become quiet, so quiet you could have probably heard a pin drop. But what I did hear was the booming sound of my own heart. From that point on, everything became so incredibly surreal, as what happened next felt like it had been plucked out of a dream. 2 pairs of thunderous feet came hurriedly scrambling towards me. The next thing I knew was a very big hand lifted the ATV off me, and I found myself looking up into 2 pairs of concerned treacle-coloured eyes. I was so shocked to be staring into the eyes of 2 human-looking hair-covered creatures that were gargantuan in size. But all my fear immediately evaporated, because in their eyes I saw only kindness and concern, not the malice that I'd seen in Sylvia's eyes when my life had been threatened. I remember thinking to myself, is this actually happening? Are these 2 creatures actually real? Or is this a dream from which I will wake up in any second? I think the nagging pain in my body made me realize all too clearly that this was no dream at all. I don't think my imagination could conjure up such a dreadful pain. All of a sudden one of the creatures spoke directly to me, and for reasons I cannot comprehend, I understood every single word she spoke, almost as if she was speaking to me directly in English. There was humour in her eyes. Kitaka kwasa, kolotani, ikolopati. You're not dreaming. I'm real. You can touch me if you like. She reached out her overlong arm towards me, and I did touch it. You are real, I said. Kilata, akotolo. The 2 creatures were amused by my astonishment. Of course I'm real. Are you all right? Are you hurt? I pointed to my leg, and one of the creatures instinctively began to massage it with her big hand and her sausage-sized fingers. She got the circulation going in my leg and managed to ease away some of the pain. The 2 creatures eventually helped me back to my feet, and they guided me back to my ATV. And then one of the creatures said to me, Kitakasana kulopotosha. I can see you're not just hurting from your fall. Your mind is full of so much turmoil. You need to let it go, or it'll eat you alive. You have a lot of hurt in your heart. It needs clearing away. You must know everything will be fine. It always is, just like the cycles of nature. Don't look at what you can't change, but look to the future and the hope it is offering you. Don't reject it because of your grief. This is a time for healing, restoration and regeneration. Look at the trees after the winter. They are naked and bare, are they not? It would seem they have no hope. But when the spring arrives, they burst with new life, they blossom and bloom, and they begin the cycle all over again. You must do the same. Let your troubles go. They will not serve your greatest good. You crashed your vehicle because of your fear, because you're confused, because you're disturbed and disquieted about the journey ahead of you. You need to trust it. Don't question the process so much. Just go with the flow. That's the best advice I can give you. Thank you. I said, everything you say is true. I've been hanging on to the past. There is so much hurt in me, but I do need to let it go. Kilati kaswan, tulopoto. Don't let it define you. Breathe it out, said the creature. I started up the engine of the ATV, and the 2 creatures walked behind me for a while. And moments later, when they realized I was all right, they went on their merry way. I could never forget these beautiful creatures that had rescued me. Their kindness touched my heart to the quick. But the sagaciously wise words of one of the creatures I knew I would never forget. It was like these incredible creatures, whatever they were, had superhuman abilities. They could read my mind with effortless ease. It was like they could physically see the turmoil in my heart, that they had encouraged me to let go. My meeting with them felt outer-worldly, as if I'd experienced something paradoxically unexplainable, almost as if God himself had reached down from heaven and used these 2 magnificent creatures on his behalf to bring me to my senses and to heal my many aches and hurts. Let's just say after my meeting with these creatures, after 24 hours, I felt so much lighter, as if the heavy weight of oppression had finally been lifted off my life. When I arrived back at the house, I must have looked a sorry sight, as if I'd been dragged through a hedge backwards. I staggered awkwardly into the house, limping on the leg that hurt. I crashed down on the kitchen chair, like a floppy rag doll. Lara was in the kitchen at the time, chopping carrots for a casserole she was making for dinner. Her mouth dropped open when she observed me. She dropped her knife at once on the chopping board and came rushing over to me. "Goodness gracious me, love! What happened? Are you all right? You're covered in dust. There's leaves in your hair. You look as if you've had a run-in with a porcupine. You've got scratches and scuff marks all over you." "A glass of ice-cold Coke, please. I'm really thirsty. I need something sweet." Lara did as I asked and poured me a glass of Coke, which she handed me, her face crinkled with puzzle lines. "What happened? You're in a right state, if you don't mind my saying so." "I just had an accident," I said, taking large gulps of the Coca-Cola that Lara had given me, grateful for the sweetness it offered my tongue, that immediately eased my angst. "An accident?" asked Lara, looking alarmed. Her eyes widened. "What happened? Don't tell me you fell off the ATV. Please, God, no." "I wish I knew exactly what happened. In truth, I'm not entirely sure. It just happened so fast. I was going up the hilly incline, the one with the steep drop. I've been in that part of the woods with Haley so many times. I know the path well. I got distracted, and then I guess instead of stopping the ATV, I put my foot on the accelerator. And the next thing I knew, the ATV was lying on top of me. I'm badly bruised. My leg hurts a lot, but I had a lucky escape. It could have been a whole lot worse. I don't think I've broken anything, but I may have pulled a few muscles in my legs. Because it's hurting, let me tell you. It's killing me, the pain." "I blame myself for this," said Lara, chastising herself, as she took full responsibility for what had happened, as if she thought in some way it was her fault. "I blame myself for this," said Lara, chastising herself. "What was I thinking, letting you go off on the ATV, after you've had quite the shock? You saw Sylvia's diary, and it really upset you. I can see that now. It stands to reason you weren't in your right mind. You were upset. It can be equivalent to driving drunk. I'm not surprised you lost control of the vehicle. Your mind was all over the place. It was a spin." She paused for a moment, giving me an inquisitorial gaze, as if trying to make sense of something. "But what I don't understand here is if you say you were pinned under your ATV, how on earth did you manage to get out from under it? Those things are very heavy." "It's a very long story." "Well, I'm listening. You can tell me now." It was after the second glass of Coca-Cola I finally told Lara everything that had happened. She listened to my story with bated breath, her eyes standing up on stalks. "You did not see the abominable snowman. That is for sure. You saw a couple of Bigfoots, 2 female Bigfoots that helped you. I didn't believe they existed, but they obviously do. What an extraordinary story. But that female Bigfoot that spoke to you is absolutely right. You do need to let the past go, Fiona, and embrace a brand new beginning." I hasten to say that is exactly what I did. I never told Barry or Haley about my Bigfoot encounter, nor did I tell them about the contents of Sylvia's diary and the secret it contained. Instead, I did what the Bigfoots had advised me to do, and I embraced the future. I now live in the state of Georgia. I'm happily married to an American man. I have a close relationship with my daughter Haley these days, and I couldn't be happier. The counselling I got from those few minutes with a Bigfoot changed my life forever. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.